In the previous video of the series, I mentioned that I was going to show how to repair cracks in these wheel covers. And so you can see this is a finished repair. It doesn't look pretty on the inside. On the outside, there's a little bit of scarring, but again, you have to understand that the point here is not to make it perfect, but just to make it last. There's still a number of steps that you have to take in order to make the repair strong. So if you have a crack, you can't just cover this. So this is two-part epoxy. The product that I prefer is JB Weld, but there are many others. And I'm not going to show how I mix this stuff. It's basically just two equal parts, pretty easy. I do use a little mixing stick like this with a square end. This is just a popsicle stick that I kind of cut off and made square just to make it easier to mix and pick up. Let me show you the crack that we're going to repair. It's right here. Basically, there are several steps that you have to take to ensure that this repair lasts. So the first one is what I call stop drilling. And that means that a small hole has to be drilled at each end of the crack in order to stop the crack from propagating. Before we do that, I use a little pick to create a divot for the drill bit. Just don't push it too hard, or you're going to make the crack worse. So we do this at both ends. Okay, once we've done that, we can drill the crack out. This is a 5/64 drill bit here. Pretty small drill bit. So as you can see, we have two holes drilled. The next step we're going to take is to V out this crack a little bit to give the epoxy more area to bite in. And for that, I generally use little burrs. I'm going to start with this guy right here. I'm using a Dremel tool. So generally the burr will follow the crack pretty well. You have to be a little careful, but it's really not that difficult to V it out. Now you don't want to go all the way through, just to take off some material. Okay, so once we're done with this burr, we can follow up with a slightly bigger one, just to enlarge the crack a little more from side to side. So maybe something like this. You can see that it still has a sharp point, but it flares out a little bit more than the previous one to make the groove wider. Okay, so let's repeat the operation. You can see that we have enlarged the crack a little more to give the epoxy a bit more room to bite in. Okay, so the next step we're going to take is abrading the surface. You can just use some sandpaper, and we're doing that so that, again, there's a little bit more surface area for the epoxy to adhere around the crack, because the epoxy is not just going into the crack, but all the way around. So you can see we scuffed up this area around the crack, and it's a good idea, of course, to blow all the debris off using some compressed air, and I don't have it handy right now. I'm just going to use some electronic cleaner to rinse it off. Okay, so our crack has been pretty much prepared for filling. The only other thing that we need to do is to put some masking tape on the other side where we drilled the holes, so that when we fill the area with the epoxy from the opposite side, it doesn't leak through all the way. And you can just cover the entire crack, it doesn't really matter. And as you can see, that's the final result. So you can see that the epoxy is completely flush with the surface, and if you really want to make it a little bit better looking or prettier, you can touch it up with some silver paint or whatever paint your wheel covers are, and it'll be less visible. It's never going to be perfect. Okay, so at this juncture, all that we have to do is mix the epoxy to equal parts and just deposit it as best we can in this area. Once that's done, we should try to keep this as flat as possible, because epoxy does have a tendency to self-level. If the wheel cover is at an angle, it might just leak down. And as I showed you before, that's kind of the final repair. It's a little rough on the backside, but nobody can see that. One more point I wanted to make is that, so there are basically two types of cracks. Some cracks have two ends that you can stop drill, and other cracks actually exit all the way out. And so if you just fill this area, so you can of course stop drill the crack on this end, but if you simply fill this area with epoxy, eventually the epoxy is going to crack. And so what we're going to do in this particular case is use some reinforcement, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Basically wall repair tape like this, just snip off a little sliver and saturate it with epoxy and put it across like so. So now basically you have a composite material, and the composite material has the matrix, which is the epoxy, and the reinforcement, which is this wall repair tape, and hopefully it'll be a lot stronger. By the way, if you want, you could just lay this tape over the entire crack, and that'll make the repair even stronger.